What's your background?
Well, that's a broad question.
Okay.
You're asking.
True. It's broad enough. You're right. How did you get into the police force, and then I'm assuming you started in the police force, then moved into being a detective?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, I'll say it's been an entire lifelong thing. Say maybe a family thing since my dad's still in it. He started before I was born. And growing up, I never wanted to do anything else. Saw the stuff that he was doing and kind of fell in love with it. And as a kid, I just knew that that's what I was supposed to do.
Really?
Yep.
Is it ever challenging? Have you ever had a case that you couldn't solve? Is it like the TV shows?
I'll say yes and no. Obviously, TV shows always draw their inspiration from real life in certain areas. And as far as a case, I'll say there's a difference between a case you can't solve and a case you can't prove.
Okay.
I am a little, I guess I'm a little obsessive a little bit with my cases. I tend to keep cases a lot longer than other detectives because I really strive and just, it annoys me if I can't figure it out or if I can't identify somebody, if I've got pictures and video, but yet I'm still struggling to actually call out who they are. Most criminals have multiple contacts or they end up getting arrested somewhere. And so I've had very good success with holding on to some cases and continuing to research them or continuing to run photos or recognition on stuff and then eventually getting an identification. So it bugs me when I can't.
Photo recognition is a thing?
It is.
Oh. At what scale? Like what they show on TV where if you walk through an airport and it catches your face, they know that you're on the, what do you call it, the watch list?
There's many different sections to it.
Oh, no.
There's many different layers to it. So different jurisdictions and different levels of government have, I'll say some are better than others.
Oh, absolutely not. Okay. I had no idea that actually really existed. That's,
And a lot of it's private.
what do you mean?
I mean, it's private companies. It's not the government doing it.
Oh, you know what? That kind of gives me peace of mind, probably. Probably not. I don't know. But, okay. What's the longest case that you've had as a detective?
Well, I'll say it's not as much a case as it was a criminal group.
Oh.
So, over the course of 4 years, I spent a lot of time working on one particular group that was, they had decided to set up base here actually in Chandler. And I was able to track them down and start identifying them. And they were from other parts of the country, but they liked Arizona for some reason. And decided to actually move here and live here. And then they started orchestrating other subsects of their criminal activity from Chandler. And so they were running stuff all across the country from here. So I worked to this one group
From Chandler?
for about 4 years. Yeah.
This is like the most suburban, white picketed fence dream that you can ever kind of, from Chandler?
It is, but their thing was they were part of the one of the groups that was targeting primarily females, primarily moms, actually, where when they drop off their kids for daycare or school, they leave their purse in the car. A lot of times they don't lock their car, so they were snatching their purse.
Wow.
And they would do that super early in the morning under cover of darkness or low light. And they would hit as many cars as they could before the banks opened. And then from 9 a.m. from bank open till 6 or 7 p.m. at bank close, they had girls that they would put wigs on and makeup on and try to make look like these victims and they were just driving through all the banks, getting cash as much as they could.
I would have never thought anyone would think up that level of a system or process to steal money out of cars.
They steal their wallet so that they get their checkbook and their ID, and with that limited information, calling into a bank, you can get just about all you need.
Oh wow, I'm such an
And
idiot.
then they figure out how much money you have in your account or what your other accounts are tied to. And so they just start going through writing personal checks to other victims, because remember, they've got 10 or 15 people's checkbooks, and
Wow.
they just writing them bad checks back and forth against each other. And at a lot of the banks, like Wells Fargo, for instance, you can get a certain percentage of the check back automatically. So you write a $3,000 check to a deposit, right? Or you do a deposit, you can automatically request like $2,000 of that back in cash before the check even clears.
Oh.
So if that's all you're doing all day, every day, imagine how much cash you're getting.
Wow. They're gone, right?
They're in prison.
Okay. I routinely leave my wallet in my car. Yeah. Okay.
No, nobody should do that, no.
Yeah, I promise you I won't do it no more. Okay. Well, I didn't. I wasn't even going to go there, but
But yes, it's the
Interesting.
East Valley is a big target because it is such a nice area. So people come here knowing that the folks that live here are probably a little more relaxed, and they are, leaving cars unlocked or leaving cars parked in their driveway when they have a 3-car garage. You know, and so it's just crime of opportunity that has a high success rate.
yeah, buddy, that's right. I got a garage. I'm good, and I put my car in my garage, so we gonna be all right.
I'm so paranoid I lock my car inside my locked garage.
Oh yeah, I do too. Yeah. I just sometimes leave my wallet in there, but yeah, my wallet over there because it's not in my pocket. Yes, it is. All right, we good. All right. Wanted to specifically ask you about what mainstream media is portraying to their viewers about gun violence, specifically around school shootings. And I know it's only May 8th, but there seems to have been from my point of view, from what I've seen from mainstream media, an onslaught of shootings. And I've almost begged the question, and I might be getting ahead of myself right now, but are they misrepresenting data to push an agenda, or is this really real? Has there been such an extreme increase in school shootings or mass shootings? What's your take on it?
Well, the first thing I would say is that when you have lots of data, no matter what kind of data it is, you can pick and choose what you show, or you can pick and choose what you use to support your theory, right? So I don't really have a direct answer for that because I haven't been researching them that long.
Sure.
I can tell you that, back to the late 90s, early 2000s, the whole Columbine thing and all of that, that was really the big shockwave, the big kind of the start of it is what they'll say. It's not the first time that kids brought guns to school. It's not the first time that kids committed a heinous crime at school, right? But it was so shocking because of the volume of it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with different types of crime, whenever they're, I don't want to say sensationalized, but they're given a lot of coverage, they're given a lot of attention, there is a group of people, a subset of society that really thrives on that. And that's where then you start seeing kind of your copycat So I think that was the big giant push. Also back then, you got to understand that the world was starting to shrink a lot more than it. That was really kind of the jump off point, right? The early 2000s with social media and being able to know what's going on more instantaneously around the world, right? So we don't. You'll see historic numbers in different cities, primarily large cities, where up until probably the last couple years, they would all tell you that they've had very low numbers of violent crimes compared to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think part of the big problem with it, though, is that we see it. We see it, we hear about it. When you would turn on the news after getting home from work, they would cover a lot of stuff that was specific to your geographic region, right? Or even your state. You didn't have a cell phone back then, right? And if you did, it certainly didn't have internet on it. It didn't have news feed on it. So we weren't being told all of the information. We weren't knowing everything that was going on all the time.
Yeah, I grew up. I mean, I don't want to put my age out there. My gray hair show faster than I think. But I remember Columbine when I was in school. And I got in Facebook right when it came out in 2005 when I was in college. But I pulled some data from, what is it called, the Gun Violence Archive. Mm-hmm. And their definition of a mass shooting, and I won't give my opinion just yet, but their definition of a mass shooting is 4+ participants.
Well, it should be 4+ victims.
It's
right?
Okay, it's victims.
Yeah.
So there was one particular one that I looked up that was in Tucson on February 5th, where there was a shooting at a block party or a house party. 3 injured, 1 killed. The suspect alive, but he was 15. And the one that died was 19. Me just looking at the map, I don't see that many in Arizona. Am I getting that right? As far as shootings go?
Well, I would say that's probably accurate. Because again, in this day and age, we would hear about it. I would suspect. But what we don't hear about also is how many times somebody called the police, or how many times somebody got their friends and neighbors together and confronted somebody who was already making weird statements, mm-hmm. or was already making threats of that nature, and went and took care of it one-on-one. And that's not saying that they enacted violence against that person to cut them off. It's to say that they just stood up and said, hey, this is unacceptable, or called their family, and their family came and made sure that they didn't have access to weapons or anything like that. We get a lot more of that type of activity than anybody realizes.
Is there, and I know that your background is you're in training. Is there specific training that you think is beneficial to not just teachers, because I know that's really out there, but any individual that's trying to either mitigate or overcome such concerns? Again, not really here in Arizona, but it could be.
Well, it's everywhere, and the main thing, just like with any other act of violence or aggression of any sort, is you have to pay attention. You have to know what's going on to be able to do anything about it, whether it's to be a help or a hindrance to that person, if you're stopping them in the act or right before the act. But you have to pay attention. You have to know what's going on with your friends, your family, your neighbors. And the second thing is you can't be afraid to take that step of trying to talk with them. So many people So many people don't want to get involved.
My dog always finds a way to get into the the clip, anything. Sorry. Yes, help him. You can cut it out later, Misa. Y'all got it? You can talk. It's okay. Thank you. My poor dog. He just wants to go play.
Yeah.
Every time I'm in a call with my boss, he always finds a way to bark. One time I was yelling at him and I forgot I was off mute. My boss had just died in laughter. Anyway, cut that out when you give back, Risa. But back to training. What do your training courses look like, or your setup? Or do you actually instruct in these trainings?
Well, yes, I do teach several different things. I teach at our police academy. I actually helped write and kind of put together part of our criminal investigations course. And so I teach every academy class for criminal investigations.
Oh,
For specifically property crimes, since that's my current specialty. And then I've been a firearms instructor and use of force instructor for the police department since 2007. So I teach or have taught. Well, it's easier to say what I haven't taught.
really?
Yeah, I have not taught
Okay.
the select fire machine gun course.
Which I'm sure that means something.
And I have not taught the sniper course. So
That's a lot of guns,
I have,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Well, so you know your stuff.
But I've also been to, more recently, I've actually been helping teach our fire department and our police department with what's called active shooter incident management.
Active shooter incident management.
Yes.
Okay.
So, in many cities that have any sort of planning in their in their process, you'll see that nationally they're working out programs to where their fire department and paramedics and their police department will come together and work a special response just specific to mass casualty incidents. So again, what you were talking about earlier with
The 4+ victims.
that's right. So if you think about the normal course or the normal response of the fire department, when they respond to help somebody, they dedicate normally an entire truck, an entire team, so 4 firefighters to one person, to one victim.
Wow.
So think about if they had the resources that were available at a moment's notice to send one truck or four to 6 firefighters to help one individual person for scenes of, a larger magnitude. Think about how many people that is, right? That's quickly grows.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to manage it, right? You have to keep the chaos in working order. And if you're responding to a dangerous active incident, right, like an active shooter type incident, well, it's not only a police department's responsibility to take direct action to stop the threat, right, but it's also our responsibility to try and provide safety of some sort or coverage to everybody else that's there, right? So we divide up the responsibilities. And part of that responsibility is actually embedding police officers and firefighters together so that the firefighters can work on patients in an active, dangerous scene, but have officers there essentially guarding them and giving them protection. So that takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of practice behind the scenes and before an incident were to happen so that when the time comes, if the time comes, everybody knows what their role is.
Do you think that I know there's been a lot of feedback, both on the positive and the negative, about teachers being responsive and ready for an active shooter on premise? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the main negative that people say is they don't want guns inside of a school for any reason. And the negative is that several states and several school districts have started providing training in firearms and use of force to their teachers. Not to all the teachers, but to those specific ones that want it. They want that extra responsibility. And so the big negative push is that primarily from people that are just against guns just because they're guns,
Sure.
don't want that being in a school no matter what, right? They think that it's just magic. A gun-free zone means that no guns can come there, even though we see many times that criminals don't care. That's why they're criminals, right?
Yep.
But we've also seen that if somebody who is planning on an act of violence at a school or at a meeting place, no matter what type it is, if they know that there is a police officer there, or they know that there's people that are trained and willing to respond in like fashion to them, they're going to go somewhere else, or they're not going to act in that manner because they're afraid of being shot or killed themselves, right? So what do I think about it? Well, I won't say that I'm against it. I won't say that I'm completely for it. I think that it's something that deserves attention, and part of that attention needs to be a very, very narrowly focused form of instruction. We can't just automatically throw guns at people and expect them to be safe and expect them to be proficient and expect them, well, honestly, expect them to act in the way they need to when the time comes. We've seen even police officers, people that have been police officers for a long time, when they're thrust into a situation of that magnitude, that sometimes they can't act either. Whether it's because they haven't mentally prepared, or because it is such a huge thing to know that you're going to be trying to take somebody else's life, that they can't compute it, they just can't overcome it.
Yeah.
And so they get what we call vapor locked, right? They just freeze. So you kind of turn the tables on that. You have somebody that has been in law enforcement for a long time, somebody that's been to lots of training, somebody that's been involved in multiple use of force incidents and dealing with other people that were even maybe trying to hurt them, right? You take that mentality or that action that you're hoping for, and then you transfer that onto somebody who's spent their life nurturing and teaching and trying to prepare children. A lot of times it's a clash in your brain. It doesn't make sense. Primarily when the suspect, the aggressor, is also a child or a young adult.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to decide in my head if I wanted to be that transparent, but I mean, it says real talk with Marcellus, so we're going to do it anyway. So I was driving down in Chandler, I won't say the street, and I got pulled over this past weekend, and I ran a red light.
I was going to say, you told me how fast you were going a couple weeks ago.
It's an Audi A8. It can go.
It goes fast.
It's really fast. But there was construction on the street, and somehow there were ducks. And I don't know where these ducks came from, but it was one of those things. And there was a car. I was trying to figure out, I'm going to run a red light or run. I just ran it. And of course, the cop is literally, I don't know what was wrong with me. I saw him. I know I saw him. He was like 5 feet from me. So he came, pulled me over, and I literally rolled down the window and I was laughing, and he's laughing too. I'm like, I don't know what I did, dude. I had something wrong with me. I'm reaching for my wallet. He's like, don't worry about it. Just make sure, we got construction. I'm like, oh, thank you. Hey, appreciate everything you do. I say all that to say that even with that positive interaction and other ones that I've had with the police force, I will not carry a gun. Because, and I'm just being honest, maybe I shouldn't be this honest, we might cut this, but I tell my friends, I tell my white friends, Marcellus, why don't you just buy a gun? Because I'm black in America. I ain't getting no gun. I don't know if and I joke about it, but there's truth in jest. It's 100% true. I will not buy a gun because I'm afraid that I'm going to get the wrong guy at the wrong time when they ask if I have a weapon in my car. What do you think of that?
I'll say I understand, and you're not the first person to tell me.
Really? All right, TJ, you got some black friends I don't know about?
Probably.
I feel it in my spirit.
Too many people don't go to church with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So one thing I would say is I do understand. Part of that, though, does come back a little bit to some of the media bias and some of the information that's being put out as stressing one certain segment of society more than others. You were talking about Chandler. I work for a different agency very near to Chandler. Predominantly not African-American cities, right?
Yeah.
But even in other areas of town, whether you're in different neighborhoods in Phoenix or Mesa or wherever, we've looked at, as police departments, we've looked at data that shows that the use of force incidents, no matter what kind they are very, very representative, even down percentage-wise, with the actual segments of society. So that to mean, quite simply, that in the Valley, more white and Hispanic people, men predominantly, have been shot by police officers than black men.
Well, we don't like to come here and it's too hot here in Arizona.
And I'll say that I think that's a good way to measure it too. In that, when it comes down to it, race has no factor in those incidents.
That's a bold statement in today's.
It's 100% accurate.
I believe it is true.
Okay, race has no factor in those incidents, those use of force incidents. The fact that it's more predominantly male than female, again, could almost be taken away because you could say that this particular action, this egregious action, was taking place and was being perpetrated by a person. And that person was dealt with by the officers that responded. Now, the officers that responded could have been black and the suspect could have been white, right?
Yep.
Or Hispanic and white, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. You call 911, whoever's there is going to show up, right? And I think that it's unfortunate, but a lot of attention does get put on the race instead of the bad action. It wasn't because somebody was black that the police got called for them shooting somebody. It's because they shot somebody, right? Same thing like here. If we go into East Mesa or AJ, we joke about it as cops a lot, where there's a lot of, how can I say it nicely? Caucasian people with drug addictions.
Now I want to know what the bad way to say it. Okay.
And when you're dealing and when you're working that neighborhood and that area, I mean, how often do you drive around town, way out east there?
Oh, I refuse.
At all?
No, I'm kidding. I've done it a couple times.
How many people that were, I'll not say any race, I'll just say not white, did you see out there?
I don't see that many.
Right. So it stands to reason that the majority of the people doing criminal activity or being contacted by police because of their criminal activity are going to be representative of that area, right? And that's what our data shows around here.
Just take the nonsense out of the data. Got it.
Well, it really bears no. It really doesn't come. I don't know how to say it. There really is no factor because the police don't get called for someone's race. They get called because somebody's doing something bad, right? And it doesn't matter. We're going to come help you. It doesn't matter what you look like as a victim. We're going to come help you, right?
Now, don't clip this with something from some other situation because I get it. You know, there are outliers. And I think what happens, and you tell me if you disagree, the media tends to throw white gasoline. I probably should say white gasoline. But they turn up the furnace on a situation and make it as if there's multiple instances like this. But if you look at the data as a whole, which I believe that it's out there and readily available for anyone that uses Google as a friend, can see that.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of agencies that publish their data yearly. Even the FBI takes a lot of that data and tracks it as well, because they're a section of the Department of Justice. And one of the responsibilities of the Department of Justice is making sure that other law enforcement entities are doing things correctly, right? That's why you'll see in different cities that have some sort of policing problem, no matter what it is, that the Department of Justice comes in, issues some kind of consent decree, and basically takes over their police department and starts firing people and and trying to straighten stuff out, right? Because that's a Department of Justice thing. Well, the FBI is part of that, and so they're responsible for obtaining all of that information and tracking it. There's a lot of agencies that don't send it to the DOJ. That doesn't mean that they don't track it, and it doesn't mean that they don't release it when they're asked about it. But it's, yeah, just like you said, it's there. For whatever reason, folks choose not to look at all of it.
Do you believe, well, not believe, have you seen instances where bad actors or crooked cops slip through the cracks? And if so, how do you think they get away with it so long?
Well, yes, of course I have, right? And I'll say that with few exceptions, cops they don't start out bad, as you say, right? Inevitably, just like with any sin, there's usually some sort of slippery slope effect. And with very few exceptions that we've seen, and I'll say we've seen it along the border, we've seen it in Texas and Arizona and California, and in some of the prisons where we know that folks with direct ties to, drug cartels or larger criminal syndicates were groomed and were prepared and were actually inserted into law enforcement entities. Except for that literal handful of people, I would counter that with where do cops come from? Many of them come from the societies they serve, right? So if your pool of applicants is from your society, well, it's just like your criminals too, right? They're all from the same area. And so I think that's kind of how folks slip through a little bit. And more so, I think lately we see folks that get a little too wrapped up in a lot of the social media stuff or a lot of the frenzies on things and allow their minds to get redirected or misdirected. And if they don't have good anchors in their life, like we would say God, and our friends at church, and our families, to a certain extent, we have people that we know will keep us accountable and keep us grounded, and we have a system and we have our faith that directs us.
I miss church one day.
If you
I
don't-
had 10 people call me. You go to my church, I promise you ain't gonna be missed. They gonna come look for you.
If you don't have that in your life, and you allow yourself to be swayed, then again, that whole slippery slope can take effect.
I can't imagine going to a job No, my job's not that bad. I can't imagine going to work. I'm just kidding. If my boss sees this, I'm just kidding. I can't imagine going to work every day and facing those many, I use this word loosely, but those many demons, those many negative, high impact, high stress situations, and then come home, hope I don't bring it with me, and then start the day all over again.
Well, you can never not bring it with you. You just can't. You can't. There was a thing that I got sent. I'm trying to think. I think actually my dad sent it to me. It was from one of his buddies that is a retired chief somewhere. Anyway, now he works and he does instruction nationally for officers, associations, and police departments that has to do with trauma and has to do with basically keeping your mind sound over the course of a career and especially after. And he showed a very powerful piece of information that most people in this country will only experience what is truly a traumatic event twice in their lifetime. Now, again, depends on your definition of traumatic.
Yeah.
Okay. But what we're talking about is what you can equate. Think of traumatic from the standpoint of a soldier, a police officer, a firefighter. Okay. So usually something horrific and usually something entailing death, right? Most people in the United States will only be directly involved with a traumatic event twice. And that's over the course of their entire lifetime. And that's if at all. Okay? Rarely more than twice. Now, you take the same person, you make them be a full-time firefighter or a full-time street cop over the course of a standard 20 to 25 year career. And those people, based on, again, we get called when bad things happen, right?
Yeah.
Those people, their average, and it can be more than this depending on the area you work, is 780.
What?
And that's not a lifetime. That's that career time.
I don't think y'all get paid enough.
I get paid way more than I ever thought I would.
Really?
I do.
Okay. All right, never mind then. Maybe you're doing all right. I'm going to ask you for $20 after the show. So, what is your take on the Texas shooting?
So, the one from just the other day in Allen?
Yeah.
Okay. I got to be careful on how I answer this. I have other areas of interest professionally that lead me down a different path than what is being released by the media currently.
Oh,
okay.
Do we need to cut the cameras?
So I can't.
Okay.
I can't get into it too much on recording.
Okay.
Obviously, it was planned. Obviously, that person's sole purpose and intent was to do exactly what he did. right? And he didn't care. He targeted men, women, children, any person, anything that was a moving target was a target of opportunity for him. Okay? The information that's been released so far, I think, is more conjecture. We have seen over the last year that anytime something of this nature happens, news media and folks that spend their entire life online just automatically start trying to figure out anything and everything that they can. They try to identify the person before the police have even released any information. I mean, it's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty crazy how they just start jumping on it. And not just jumping on it, but posting on it and airing it live, and all these experts and all these retired people from other areas, everybody has something to say because it gives them free publicity. It's not that they have anything that needs to be said.
Yeah.
But I have to be careful because of certain things that I take away from what I've seen on the shooting lead me to think one very specific thing. So far, that has not been one of the areas covered or released in the conjecture. So I'm curious to see what plays out.
I'm of the mind that people are starting to move away from what I consider mainstream media like Fox News, CNN, even news articles from the New York Times. Because everything seems to be so shoved in your face. And it doesn't seem to be truthful from a journalist point of view.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that a lot of people are figuring out that a lot of the mainstream media have thrown their journalistic roots by the wayside because they would rather have the 5 minutes of fame that go with it. Whereas when you think about back in history with a lot of the journalists and even some of the ones today, they were very strict about how they went about getting information. They were strict on how they released information.
Yep.
They protected sources. They were very, very specific in doing their job. And a big part of that too was truth.
Sure.
It was not what is my agenda today.
Keep him out the kennel. It's okay. Sorry.
It's okay. It wasn't how am I feeling today? Who am I mad at today? Or how am I going to spin this today? It was truth, right? And that's not been the case, I would say, even in the last decade. But it's just gotten really, really rampant as of late.
I agree. What do you think the answer is to... I pause to almost say this word, but I'm going to say social acceptance around gun violence, school shootings. Every time I think about the Tennessee school shooting, it makes me extremely sad. But now that I look at this Allen mall shooting, I mean, it just had another 3-year-old that died. And it just, I'll be honest, I don't see any way around it except for Jesus to come back.
Well, that is probably, we'll say that's the number one thing.
Yeah.
People need God. If you look at the vast majority, and I'll say it that way because there's always a slim percentage of people that are legitimately crazy. They're legitimately insane. Okay? But you take them out of the picture, the vast majority of people that are enacting violence in this way, whether it's at a school, at a mall, at a church, at the neighborhood block party, whatever, is you'll see that they're very selfish, self-centered, and embittered because of some perceived wrong against them, whether legitimate or not. But they're so turned internally because of that, that bitterness grows and takes root and inevitably manifests in anger. And when it comes out, it can come out in many different ways. I mean, before all of these shootings, what was another thing, and has been throughout many decades, and not specific to the United States, serial murderers, right? Would we not say that by number comparison, the people doing these shootings are committing the same amount of murders as some of these serial murderers?
Yep.
Right? And is not the mindset
The same.
very similar?
Yep.
Right? Now, there's obviously a whole host of other things that you get into when you get into the whole serial murderer thing, when you get into the psychology of it and all that kind of stuff. But at its root, I would suggest that there is some sort of correlation or some sort of similarity at least. But when people have no faith, they have no hope, their only focus is on themselves and however they feel that they've been wronged or slighted for whatever reason, and that turns into bitterness and anger. The reason that they're directing that outwardly is then in turn because it seems to be their way of making everybody else feel the sadness or badness or whatever they want to say they have inside. They're trying to make everybody else hurt the same way, which is obviously twisted because they're obviously not the victim of the crime that they're enacting.
No.
Right? But it just goes back to that whole self-centeredness that, I'm so important and I'm so number one that everybody else needs to experience what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I think is really the main problem. It's a heart issue, just like any other sins. But yeah, when you let that bitterness grow, you don't know how the devil's going to use it.
Ain't that the truth? Huh. Don't let him use it.
That's my personal take.
No, I get it. Any final remarks, things we need to know you think would be beneficial to the public? Yeah.
Well, again, my own personal take. And part of it has to do with some of the study I've done for teaching some of these classes and some of the things that have come up when you dive into the planning of some of these shooters and some of the stuff that they do. For instance, the Tennessee shooting, I believe there was another school on her list that was actually the primary. And she, in her pre-planning, figured out that it was going to be a more difficult target and moved to her number 2 choice, which is where she ended up doing her attack. Okay? So there's always some sort of thought process. It's never somebody just decides to go shoot up everybody. It's never that simple. You have to think anymore, and it's unfortunate that we've arrived at this state in our society, but you have to give some thought to it. And not to all of these previous actions, because that's gonna depress you. That's gonna take a toll of its own.
Sure.
But more so to the possibility, right? And it's the same. It's the same with any sort of crime of opportunity or crime of violence. If you're paying attention, you're less likely to get robbed. Walking down the street, you're less likely to get mugged. If people know that you're paying attention,
Sure.
right? Because they're afraid that you're either going to get away or you're going to react toward them and cause them harm, right? But part of that preparation from my personal standpoint is, and I can say this even if I wasn't a police officer with all the training that I have, I would still take steps to be trained and to be prepared. Whether that's, I've seen some people do it from a medical standpoint. They carry trauma dressings and other stuff around with them all the time in a backpack or in a shoulder bag or something, to where you can give aid either to yourself or to your family or to anybody you see that you come across, or to carrying a firearm and being proficient to the level that you can take the fight back to someone and stop them as fast as possible. We joke about, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away, right? This guy in Allen was only stopped so fast because there was a police officer across the street on a call for service.
I saw that.
If you go back to the Tennessee one, how long did it actually take for the officers to get there,
I have no
get
idea.
inside, and find her?
How long was it?
I think it was almost 14 minutes.
What? Oh,
It was somewhere between 9 and 14. It was a while.
Wow.
That's a little bit different though, trying to go through a building.
Sure.
It's different because sound echoes and bounces off, and so you never know exactly where you need to head necessarily. In the mall, it was a little more specific. He was right there. He heard, he saw, he addressed it, right? But when it comes to criminal behavior, it doesn't matter. You in England or in France, where they've made it illegal to have almost any kind of gun, they're still having lots of attacks.
What they call it, knifing?
They're using edged weapons. They're using acid, throwing bad acid on people and
Where do you find acid?
killing them that way.
People will find a way.
Or they're getting cars or trucks and running people over, right? They're inflicting the damage. They're inflicting the death and the mayhem however they can, right?
Sure.
And in America, we have lots of guns. Criminals have always been able to get their hands on firearms. It's illegal for a known felon to have a gun, right?
Doesn't stop 'em.
They don't have that right, but they don't care. It's illegal to have a gun on a school campus, but they don't care because they're a criminal, right? It doesn't matter. So the only, I wish I could remember who had this saying, but in essence, it is, what was it? The only way for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So that might have been a Churchill statement from World War II. But it doesn't matter. Evil is there. And we have to be prepared to deal with it one way or another. And trying to be ignorant and hoping isn't going to be the way to do that. So that would be, I don't know, that was a lot longer than 2 cents. But
No, and it was good info.
but you have to be prepared one way or another. So yeah, in my truck, I always have some sort of first aid stuff, right? When I am deployed out elsewhere, and even when I'm not. I always have, and people don't know how to react when I say this, but I say I always have at least one gun.
At least, okay. Okay.
Well, guns are tools, right?
Yeah.
Different tools have different functions and different limitations. So obviously at work, I have to be prepared to deal with a broader range of situations.
Sure.
Right. However, you see me in other different places, whether it's church or working, an undercover detail somewhere, trying to blend in somewhere, and provide security that way. I still have to be able to take action
Sure.
if evil presents itself, right? So that's my choice of being prepared.
You may have changed my mind on it.
And it's easy enough, and I'll hit on that too. It's easy enough to get training, especially around here.
Really?
We have lots of ranges. We have lots of private citizens that have prior law enforcement or military experience, people that are squared away, that want to help teach and train the good guys.
I ain't never shot a gun in my whole life. Okay.
And back to your earlier concern about why you
Wouldn't carry.
wouldn't want to have a gun. Yeah. I would say one of the arguments against that is you live in Arizona. It doesn't matter who you are in Arizona, as the great state that it is, except for being too hot. You can legally possess a firearm as long as you're not a criminal, right?
Yeah.
And you not only can you possess it, but you can carry it. You can keep it concealed. Now, when it comes to the law, as far as your contact with any sort of law enforcement personnel, the law only requires that if you're asked, that you answer truthfully. So if you do get stopped because you're driving too fast, and the officer says, "Are there any weapons in the car?" All the law says is that you have to say, "Yes, there are." Me personally, I've lived here my whole life. I'm used to people having guns. I always have a gun. So it doesn't shock me when people say, "Yes, I have a gun," or "Yes, there's a gun in the vehicle." So as long as you're truthful about it, and the officer might be a little extra cautious, the officer might request that you turn it over to them for the duration of your interaction. They're not going to keep it from you. They're not going to take it away. They're going to manage it to make sure that the scene is safe, because they don't know you from anybody else, right? And as soon as your contact has been deemed to be a good contact, then you're going to get it right back. And a lot of cops are just going to say, "Okay, where is it? What is it? All right, make sure that you don't touch it." Right? And that's a simple thing. And because so many people around here do possess weapons and carry weapons every day, it's not a shock. Now, if you're in a different area, a different city, where maybe that state, that jurisdiction, they don't have the same laws, they have much more strict laws, then I can understand a little more trepidation at
Yep.
at the possible interaction.
Yeah.
But even then, in many states have reciprocity with if you were to go your concealed carry license, right? And a lot of people that hold that keep it right next to their driver's license. So if they're ever contacted, they get it out right away with the driver's license, so that the officer sees that while they're telling them, because that means that you have gone through a background process. That means you've been through a training program. That means that you're not just some dude with a gun, right? It gives a whole nother level of credence to you being okay and you being the proper responsible person to have one.
I know we were going to probably segue to a close, but another question just popped up from the team, and I think it's a good one. With since we're on the topic of Arizona, What are your thoughts? And maybe I'm gonna ask at least on Arizona Mills and Phoenix in general being a hot spot for child and human trafficking. I was gonna ask, is it true? But I actually think it is true. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we see the effects of child and human trafficking, and I'm going to say that it's specific to sexual trafficking. They're not keeping kids to be, servants. They're not keeping them to be slaves. It is always got a sexual component to it. Primarily with younger adult women as well, whether they're from this country or from another country. So to just say human trafficking, it's not. I'm gonna say it's sex trafficking. Okay. Is it here? It's everywhere.
Wow.
Now, do we find that it is as big of a problem in the valley as compared to, say, LA or San Francisco or Las Vegas or New York? No, we don't see it to that extent because one, we don't have the international movement and populations that those areas do.
Sure.
Two, there's very noted sections of town in those cities as well, where people know that if you want this thing, you go here. If you want drugs, you go here. If you want, fake merchandise, you go here. If you want a prostitute, you go here. If you want a child, you go here, right? Because it is that way. Now, obviously, the general public doesn't know that or doesn't even think about it. Quite honestly, it's too repulsive for many people to give too much consideration.
I would think it would be extremely difficult, but maybe this is just, ignorance being bliss, but I would figure it would be extremely difficult to procure a child for something so dark and yeah.
Well, when you say procure, it makes it sound like you're out purchasing something, right?
Yes, I was trying to find a nice way to put it, but that's what what I've seen.
And so in different parts of the world,
yeah,
it is that. It is purchasing. What we find in the United States is that the majority of the young adults and children that are involved in this underground situation are runaways. A lot of them are runaways. And it's, even though they're younger, it seems, the things that I've seen, it looks like the interactions or the way that they're managed is still similar to how different prostitutes used to be held and kept. But usually a little more restrictive because people are more likely to take notice of a child or someone that they think could be a child than an adult. It doesn't shock people in certain areas to see young women out, that it's well known what they're doing and what their purpose is for being where they are, right? But it does still shock the majority of the United States if they see a child made up to look like an adult,
yeah,
or something like that. So they're usually more restrictive on where they let them go or how they manage them. But there's usually an underlying issue of some sort of dependency or codependency, whether it's to the person that's managing them or to a drug, an addiction of sorts. Sometimes, depending on personality, you could even say that there's a bit of brainwashing. People use that term, but it really is just, again, a lack of hope sometimes.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what the bad guys will do is if it's not a drug related thing where they're keeping them basically, sedated or under the influence of this drug for extended periods of time, is they get into their personality or into their psyche of, your parents are going to hate you when they figure it out, when they know what you've done, and I'm going to tell them if you if you leave, I'm going to tell all your friends, and it's going to be a major embarrassment, and so they almost kind of manipulate them that way. But we don't see it a huge amount here. I will say that it's oddly enough, when the Super Bowl comes to town, it's always a bigger influx. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into other things, but
No, I get it.
for whatever reason, when you have a large scale event that draws people from all over the world, then you have this problem.
Present.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
Yep. But we do have the FBI runs it currently, and even my agency has a child crimes detective assigned
Wow.
full time.
Okay.
I know Mesa PD has several. Chandler PD has a few, and if it's not in person, it's online. They're always trying to monitor and catch people. Hopefully before anything happens, if we can. But yeah, there's a task force group full time working here in the Valley.
There was another podcast just dropped an episode just a few hours from now. The Steve Ryan show on child trafficking. I tried to watch a few minutes of it this afternoon. I couldn't even get that far into it. It's just insane to me that who?
Sean Ryan.
Who's Steve Ryan? I don't know where I got that from.
His brother.
Sean Ryan. We'll drop the link in the video. But yeah. Well, TJ, I appreciate you coming by and taking the time. I think this was really good content.
Well, I hope I could give some further insight or understanding, or
Yeah,
at least some entertainment value.
you did. You did. I appreciate it. Any other final questions from the team? All right.
No,
Thanks,
all right,
CJ.
very good. Thank you.